Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy, Italian, Divina Commedia, is a long Italian narrative poem by Dante Alighieri, begun circa 1308 and completed in 1320, a year before his death in 1321. It is widely considered to be the preeminent work in Italian literature and one of the greatest works of world literature. The poem's imaginative vision of the afterlife is representative of the medieval worldview as it had developed in the Western Church by the 14th century. It helped establish the Tuscan language, in which it is written, also in most present-day Italian market editions, as the standardized Italian language. It is divided into three parts: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. The narrative describes Dante's travels through hell, purgatory, and paradise or heaven, while allegorically the poem represents the soul's journey towards God. Dante draws on medieval Christian theology and philosophy, especially Thomistic philosophy derived from the Summa Theologica of Thomas Aquinas. Consequently, the Divine Comedy has been called the Summa in verse. In Dante's work, Virgil is presented as human reason and Beatrice is presented as divine knowledge. The work was originally simply titled Commedia, pronounced Commedia, so also in the first printed edition, published in 1472, Tuscan for comedy, later adjusted to the modern Italian Commedia. The adjective divino was added by Giovanni Boccaccio, and the first edition to name the poem Divina Commedia in the title was that of the Venetian humanist Lodovico Dolce, published in 1555 by Gabriele Giolito de Ferrari. Structure and story. The Divine Comedy is composed of 14,233 lines that are divided into three cantiche, singular cantica, Inferno, Hell, Purgatorio, Purgatory, and Paradiso, Paradise, each consisting of 33 cantos, Italian plural canti. An initial canto, serving as an introduction to the poem and generally considered to be part of the first cantica, brings the total number of cantos to 100. It is generally accepted, however, that the first two cantos serve as a unitary prologue to the entire epic, and that the opening two cantos of each cantica serve as prologues to each of the three cantiche. The number 3 is prominent in the work, alluding to the Trinity, represented in part by the number of cantiche and their lengths. Additionally, the verse scheme used, terza rima, is hentasyllabic, lines of 11 syllables, with the lines composing tercids according to the rhyme scheme ABBA, BCB, CDC, did. Written in the first person, the poem tells of Dante's journey through the three realms of the dead, lasting from the night before Good Friday to the Wednesday after Easter in the spring of 1300. The Roman poet Virgil guides him through hell and purgatory. Beatrice, Dante's ideal woman, guides him through heaven. Beatrice was a Florentine woman he had met in childhood and admired from afar in the mode of the then fashionable courtly love tradition, which is highlighted in Dante's earlier work La Vita Nuova. The structure of the three realms follows a common numerical pattern of 9 plus 1, for a total of 10, 9 circles of the Inferno, followed by Lucifer contained at its bottom, 9 rings of Mount Purgatory, followed by the Garden of Eden crowning its summit, and the 9 celestial bodies of Paradiso, followed by the Empyrean containing the very essence of God. Within each group of 9, 7 elements correspond to a specific moral scheme, subdivided into 3 subcategories, while 2 others of greater particularity are added to total 9. For example, the 7 deadly sins of the Catholic Church that are cleansed in purgatory are joined by special realms for the late repentant and the excommunicated by the Church. The core 7 sins within purgatory correspond to a moral scheme of love perverted, subdivided into 3 groups corresponding to excessive love, lust, gluttony, greed, deficient love, sloth, and malicious love, wrath, envy, pride. In Central Italy's political struggle between Guelphs and Ghibellines, Dante was part of the Guelphs, who in general favored the papacy over the Holy Roman Emperor. Florence's Guelphs split into factions around 1300, the White Guelphs and the Black Guelphs. Dante was among the White Guelphs who were exiled in 1302 by the Lord Mayor Canda Gabriele di Gubbio, after troops under Charles of Valois entered the city, at the request of Pope Boniface VIII, who supported the Black Guelphs. This exile, which lasted the rest of Dante's life, shows its influence in many parts of the comedy, from prophecies of Dante's exile to Dante's views of politics, to the eternal damnation of some of his opponents. The last word in each of the three cantiches is stel, stars. Inferno. The poem begins on the night before Good Friday in the year 1300, halfway along our life's path, nel mezzo del cammino di nostra vita. Dante is 35 years old, half of the biblical lifespan of 70, Psalms 89 hours 10 minutes, Vulgate, lost in a dark wood, understood as sin, assailed by beasts, a lion, a leopard, and a she-wolf, he cannot evade and unable to find the straight way, Diretta via, also translatable as right way, to salvation, symbolized by the sun behind the mountain. Conscious that he is ruining himself and that he is falling into a low place, basso loco, where the sun is silent, el saltes, Dante is at last rescued by Virgil, and the two of them begin their journey to the underworld. Each sin's punishment in Inferno is a contrapposto, a symbolic instance of poetic justice. For example, in Canto 20, fortune-tellers and soothsayers must walk with their heads on backwards, unable to see what is ahead, because that was what they had tried to do in life. Allegorically, the Inferno represents the Christian soul seeing sin for what it really is, and the three beasts represent three types of sin: the self-indulgent, the violent, and the malicious. These three types of sin also provide the three main divisions of Dante's hell: upper hell, outside the city of Dis, for the four sins of indulgence, lust, gluttony, avarice, anger, circle 7 for the sins of violence, and circles 8 and 9 for the sins of fraud and treachery. Added to these are two unlike categories that are specifically spiritual. Limbo, in circle 1, contains the virtuous pagans who were not sinful but were ignorant of Christ, and circle 6 contains the heretics who contradicted the doctrine and confused the Spirit of Christ. The circles number 9, with the addition of Satan completing the structure of 9 plus 1 equals 10. Purgatorio. Having survived the depths of hell, Dante and Virgil ascend out of the undergloom to the mountain of Purgatory on the far side of the world. The mountain is on an island, the only land in the southern hemisphere, created by the displacement of rock which resulted when Satan's fall created hell, which Dante portrays as existing underneath Jerusalem. The mountain has 7 terraces, corresponding to the 7 deadly sins or 7 roots of sinfulness. The classification of sin here is more psychological than that of the Inferno, being based on motives, rather than actions. It is also drawn primarily from Christian theology, rather than from classical sources. However, Dante's illustrative examples of sin and virtue draw on classical sources as well as on the Bible and on contemporary events. Love, a theme throughout the Divine Comedy, is particularly important for the framing of sin on the mountain of Purgatory. While the love that flows from God is pure, it can become sinful as it flows through humanity. Humans can sin by using love towards improper or malicious sins, wrath, envy, pride, or using it to proper ends but with love that is either not strong enough, sloth, or love that is too strong, lust, gluttony, greed. Below the 7 purges of the soul is the anti-purgatory, containing the excommunicated from the church and the late repentant who died, often violently, before receiving rites. Thus the total comes to 9, with the addition of the Garden of Eden at the summit, equaling 10. Allegorically, the Purgatorio represents the Christian life. Christian souls arrive escorted by an angel, singing an exit to Israel da Egipto. In his letter to Cangrand, Dante explains that this reference to Israel leaving Egypt refers both to the redemption of Christ and to the conversion of the soul from the sorrow and misery of sin to the state of grace. Appropriately, therefore, it is Easter Sunday when Dante and Virgil arrive. The Purgatorio is notable for demonstrating the medieval knowledge of a spherical earth. During the poem, Dante discusses the different stars visible in the southern hemisphere, the altered position of the sun, and the various time zones of the earth. At this stage it is, Dante says, sunset at Jerusalem, midnight on the river Ganges, and sunrise in Purgatory. Paradiso. After an initial ascension, Beatrice guides Dante through the 9 celestial spheres of heaven. These are concentric and spherical, as in Aristotelian and Ptolemaic cosmology. While the structures of the Inferno and Purgatorio were based on different classifications of sin, the structure of the Paradiso is based on the 4 cardinal virtues and the 3 theological virtues. The 7 lowest spheres of heaven deal solely with the cardinal virtues of prudence, fortitude, justice, and temperance. The first 3 spheres involve a deficiency of one of the cardinal virtues, the moon, containing the inconstant, whose vows to God waned as the moon and thus lack fortitude; Mercury, containing the ambitious, who were virtuous for glory and thus lacked justice; and Venus, containing the lovers, whose love was directed towards another than God and thus lacked temperance. The final 4 incidentally are positive examples of the cardinal virtues, all led on by the Sun, containing the prudent, whose wisdom lighted the way for the other virtues, to which the others are bound, constituting a category on its own. Mars contains the men of fortitude who died in the cause of Christianity, Jupiter contains the kings of justice, and Saturn contains the temperate, the monks who abided by the contemplative lifestyle. The 7 subdivided into 3 are raised further by 2 more categories: the 8th sphere of the fixed stars that contain those who achieve the theological virtues of faith, hope and love, and represent the Church triumphant, the total perfection of humanity, cleansed of all the sins and carrying all the virtues of heaven; and the 9th circle, or primum mobile, corresponding to the geocentrism of medieval astronomy, which contains the angels, creatures never poisoned by original sin. Topping them all is the Empyrean, which contains the essence of God, completing the 9-fold division to 10. Dante meets and converses with several great saints of the Church, including Thomas Aquinas, Bonaventure, Saint Peter, and Saint John. The Paradiso is consequently more theological in nature than the Inferno and the Purgatorio. However, Dante admits that the vision of heaven he receives is merely the one his human eyes permit him to see, and thus the vision of heaven found in the cantos is Dante's personal vision. The Divine Comedy finishes with Dante seeing the triune God. In a flash of understanding that he cannot express, Dante finally understands the mystery of Christ's divinity and humanity, and his soul becomes aligned with God's love. History. Manuscripts. According to the Italian Dante Society, no original manuscript written by Dante has survived, although there are many manuscript copies from the 14th and 15th centuries. Some 800 are listed on their site. Early printed editions. The first printed edition was published in Foligno, Italy, by Johann Neumeister and Evangelista Angelini de Trevi on April 11, 1472. Of the 300 copies printed, 14 still survive. The original printing press is on display in the Oratorio della Nunziatella in Foligno. Thematic concerns. The Divine Comedy can be described simply as an allegory. Each canto, and the episodes therein, can contain many alternative meanings. Dante's allegory, however, is more complex, and, in explaining how to read the poem, see the letter to Caingrand, he outlines other levels of meaning besides the allegory: the historical, the moral, the literal, and the anagogical. The structure of the poem is also quite complex, with mathematical and numerological patterns distributed throughout the work, particularly 3s and 9s, which are related to the Holy Trinity. The poem is often lauded for its particularly human qualities: Dante's skillful delineation of the characters he encounters in hell, purgatory, and paradise, his bitter denunciations of Florentine and Italian politics, and his powerful poetic imagination. Dante's use of real characters, according to Dorothy Sayers in her introduction to her translation of the Inferno, allows Dante the freedom of not having to involve the reader in description, and allows him to make room in his poem for the discussion of a great many subjects of the utmost importance, thus widening its range and increasing its variety. Dante called the poem comedy. The adjective divine was added later, in the 16th century, because poems in the ancient world were classified as high tragedy, or low comedy. Low poems had happy endings and were written in everyday language, whereas high poems treated more serious matters and were written in an elevated style. Dante was one of the first in the Middle Ages to write of a serious subject, the redemption of humanity, in the low and vulgar Italian language and not the Latin one might expect for such a serious topic. Boccaccio's account that an early version of the poem was begun by Dante in Latin is still controversial. Scientific themes. Although the Divine Comedy is primarily a religious poem, discussing sin, virtue, and theology, Dante also discusses several elements of the science of his day. This mixture of science with poetry has received both praise and blame over the centuries. The Purgatorio repeatedly refers to the implications of a spherical Earth, such as the different stars visible in the southern hemisphere, the altered position of the Sun, and the various time zones of the Earth. For example, at sunset in Purgatory it is midnight at the Ebro, dawn in Jerusalem, and noon on the river Ganges. Dante travels through the center of the Earth in the Inferno, and comments on the resulting change in the direction of gravity in Canto 34, lines 76 to 120. A little earlier, 33, 102 to 105, he queries the existence of wind in the frozen inner circle of hell, since it has no temperature differentials. Inevitably, given its setting, the Paradiso discusses astronomy extensively, but in the Ptolemaic sense. The Paradiso also discusses the importance of the experimental method in science, with a detailed example in lines 94 to 105 of Canto 2. A briefer example occurs in Canto 15 of the Purgatorio, lines 16 to 21, where Dante points out that both theory and experiment confirm that the angle of incidence is equal to the angle of reflection. Other references to science in the Paradiso include descriptions of clockwork in Canto 24, lines 13 to 18, and Thales' theorem about triangles in Canto 13, lines 101 to 102. Galileo Galilei is known to have lectured on the Inferno, and it has been suggested that the poem may have influenced some of Galileo's own ideas regarding mechanics. Theories of influence from Islamic philosophy. In 1919, Miguel Azan Palacios, a Spanish scholar and a Catholic priest, published La Escatologia Musulmana en la Divina Comedia, Islamic Eschatology in the Divine Comedy, an account of parallels between early Islamic philosophy and the Divine Comedy. Palacios argued that Dante derived many features of and episodes about the hereafter from the spiritual writings of Ibn Arabi and from the Isra and Miraj or night journey of Muhammad to heaven. The latter is described in the Ahadith in the Kitab al-Miraj, translated into Latin in 1264 or shortly before as Liber Scili Macamti, the Book of Muhammad's Ladder, and has significant similarities to the Paradiso, such as the sevenfold division of paradise, although this is not unique to the Kitab al-Miraj or Islamic cosmology. Some superficial similarities of the Divine Comedy to the Risalat al-Ghufran or Epistle of Forgiveness of al-Ma'ari have also been mentioned in this debate. The Risalat al-Ghufran describes the journey of the poet in the realms of the afterlife and includes dialogue with people in heaven and hell, although, unlike the Kitab al-Miraj, there is little description of these locations, and it is unlikely that Dante borrowed from this work. Dante did, however, live in a Europe of substantial literary and philosophical contact with the Muslim world, encouraged by such factors as Averroism, Averroes, Cel Gran Commento Fio Commedia, Inferno, 4, 144, meaning Averroes, who wrote the Great Comment, and the patronage of Alfonso X of Castile. Of the 12 wise men Dante meets in Canto X of the Paradiso, Thomas Aquinas and, even more so, Siger of Brabant were strongly influenced by Arabic commentators on Aristotle. Medieval Christian mysticism also shared the Neoplatonic influence of Sufis such as Ibn Arabi. Philosopher Frederick Copleston argued in 1950 that Dante's respectful treatment of Averroes, Avisa, and Siger of Brabant indicates his acknowledgement of a considerable debt to Islamic philosophy. Although this philosophical influence is generally acknowledged, many scholars have not been satisfied that Dante was influenced by the Kitab al-Miraj. The 20th century Orientalist Francesco Gabrieli expressed skepticism regarding the claimed similarities, and the lack of evidence of a vehicle through which it could have been transmitted to Dante. Even so, while dismissing the probability of some influences posited in Palacios' work, Gabrieli conceded that it was at least possible, if not probable, that Dante may have known the Librasculi and have taken from it certain images and concepts of Muslim eschatology. Shortly before her death, the Italian philologist Maria Corti pointed out that, during his stay at the court of Alfonso X, Dante's mentor Brunetto Latini met Bonaventura da Siena, a Tuscan who had translated the Kitab al-Miraj from Arabic into Latin. Corti speculates that Brunetto may have provided a copy of that work to Dante. René Guénon, a Sufi convert and scholar of Ibn Arabi, rejected in the esotericism of Dante the theory of his influence, direct or indirect, on Dante. Palacios' theory that Dante was influenced by Ibn Arabi was satirized by the Turkish academic Orhan Pamuk in his novel The Black Book. Literary influence in the English-speaking world and beyond. The Divine Comedy was not always as well regarded as it is today. Although recognized as a masterpiece in the centuries immediately following its publication, the work was largely ignored during the Enlightenment, with some notable exceptions such as Vittorio Alfieri, Antoine de Rivarol, who translated the Inferno into French, and Giambattista Vico, who in the Signs in Nuova and in the Giudizio su Dante inaugurated what would later become the Romantic reappraisal of Dante, juxtaposing him to Homer. The comedy was rediscovered in the English-speaking world by William Blake, who illustrated several passages of the epic, and the Romantic writers of the 19th century. Later authors such as T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, Samuel Beckett, C.S. Lewis and James Joyce have drawn on it for inspiration. The poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was its first American translator, and modern poets, including Seamus Heaney, Robert Pinsky, John Shirley, W. S. Merwin, and Stanley Lombardo, have also produced translations of all or parts of the book. In Russia, beyond Pushkin's translation of a few verses, Osip Mandelstam's late poetry has been said to bear the mark of a tormented meditation on the comedy. In 1934, Mandelstam gave a modern reading of the poem in his labyrinthine conversation on Dante. In T.S. Eliot's estimation, Dante and Shakespeare divide the world between them. There is no third. For Jorge Luis Borges, The Divine Comedy was the best book literature has achieved. English translations. New English translations of The Divine Comedy continue to be published regularly. Notable English translations of the complete poem include the following. A number of other translators, such as Robert Pinsky, have translated the Inferno only. In the arts, The Divine Comedy has been a source of inspiration for countless artists for almost 7 centuries. There are many references to Dante's work in literature. In music, Franz Liszt was one of many composers to write works based on The Divine Comedy. In sculpture, the work of Auguste Rodin includes themes from Dante, and many visual artists have illustrated Dante's work, as shown by the examples above. There have also been many references to The Divine Comedy in cinema, television, digital arts, comics and video games. Gallery. See also. Allegory in the Middle Ages. Book of Art of Iraf. List of cultural references in Divine Comedy. Paradise Lost. Citations. Bibliography. Is, Harry, 2017. Seeking God in the Works of T.S. Eliot and Michelangelo. Newcastle upon Tyne, Cambridge Scholars. ISBN 978-144384-394. Shaw, Prue, 2014. Reading Dante, From Here to Eternity. New York, Liveright Publishing. ISBN 978-163-149-0064. Drone, George Andrew, 2000. Exile. In Richard Lansing, ed. The Dante Encyclopedia. London and New York, Routledge. ISBN 978-041587-611-7. Further reading. Ziolkowski, Jan M. 2015. Dante and Islam. Fordham University Press, New York. ISBN 0823263878. External links. Princeton Dante Project website that offers the complete text of The Divine Comedy, and Dante's other works, in Italian and English along with audio accompaniment in both languages. Includes historical and interpretive annotation. The comedy in English, Drans. Carry, with Doors illustrations, zipped HTML downloadable from Project Gutenberg, Carey/Longfellow/Mandelbaum Parallel Edition, Drans. James Fincotter. In Italian, full text of the Commedia, 6. Dante Dartmouth Project, full text of more than 70 Italian, Latin, and English commentaries on the Commedia, ranging in date from 1322, Iaco Polari, to the 2000s, Robert Hollander.